Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today on Masechtas Horiyot Daf Yud. We're going to begin on Testament Bays by the new Parak, the new Mishnah. Says the Masechtas Kohen Mashiach. So you have the anointed Kohen, which of course is referring to the Kohen Gadol, Shechata. So he did a sin while he was the Kohen Gadol. However, before he brought his carbon, he was removed from his position. He was demoted. So the question is going to be, because there's a unique carbon that's given by the Kohen Gadol, and it's different than the carbon that's given when you are a Hedjit, so what do? Do we go buster the time of the Avera, and therefore he was a Kohen Gadol? Or do we say that now, since he was demoted, he's considered to be a Hedjit, and therefore he should bring the carbon of a Hedjit? The Chen Nasi, which we translated before as a king, which we're going to see, that's what the Gemara is going to say today. Shechata, so he sinned as a king, which has a chiyuv to bring a particular type of a carbon. And then afterwards, he was removed from his position. So what is the din? So Kohen Mashiach may be par. So the din is that even though he is not a Kohen Gadol anymore, but since at the time he did the sin, he was a Kohen Gadol, so he brings a par. Vahanasi may be sa'ir. And when it comes to the nasi, he brings a he-goat. Now, let's look in Rashi. So the Chiddush, as he brings down over here, is that he still has to bring a par. The hakivan the tanule over mishichusai the may be par. Koshechein chata v'yakach over mishichusa the may be par. So in a situation where he was not a Kohen and then he sinned, and of course in that case it brings a par. So also in the case where he sinned and then afterwards he was no longer a Kohen Gadol, he also brings a par. Holo kasha mishum dektani gabi nasi. When it comes to a king, that when it comes to a king, when he's removed from his position, and he sins only afterwards, so ki hedjit maisi. So then in that situation, he will bring like a hedjit, because that's at the time that he sinned, he was no longer a king. Do you think also, let's say he was a king and he sinned and then he was removed, then nesi nami ki hedjit, hilkach Tana Gabi Nasi Shechata V'Yachach Avar Demesi Kinasi. That's why we have over here a king that sinned as a king, and then he's no longer a king. Still, he brings it as a king, which is a sa'ir. Right? Tani Gabi Nasi Chata V'Yachach Avar Tani Nami Gabi Mashiach Chata V'Yachach Avar. Okay, so that's the din. Now, what happens back in the Mishnah? Let's say we're dealing with a Mashiach. Again, we're talking about a Kohen Gadol, that he was first removed. He's not the Kohen Gadol. Then he sinned. Or so Kohen Mashiach may be par. So in this situation, it doesn't make any difference. When it comes to the Kohen Gadol, he always brings a par. Not only in a situation where he sinned as a Kohen Gadol, but even if he sinned after he was removed from that position, but nonetheless, he still has to bring a par, because at one point he was a Kohen Gadol. However, v'hanasi kehedjit. When it comes to a nasi, we see it's not the same. When it comes to a nasi, and this is the chiddush, that a nasi, because he was not the king when he sinned, so then he has to bring the carbon chatas like any other person, a se'ira or a kisba. However, in the event where he sinned as a king, so then he would bring a sa'ir, which is the unique requirement of a nasi. So hashta, so again, that's the distinction when it comes to a Kohen Gadol versus a king. If they sinned after they were already demoted, what the din is. Okay, so hashta yeshloim rabbi mishichusai. We already mentioned the case that you were removed from your position, and then v'achar kach cheta, and then afterwards you sinned. that maybe par, that the Kohen Gadol has to bring a par. So if he sinned and then he was removed, obviously, right? So in the event where he was already not the Kohen Gadol, and then he sinned, so you would think he's a hedjit, so maybe he shouldn't bring a par, he should bring like a regular person. No, he still brings a par. So if that's the case, so obviously if he sinned while he was a Kohen Gadol, so then obviously he's going to bring a par. What's the whole chiddush? So right, when it comes to the Kohen Gadol, it's not a chiddush, but it's a chiddush on the other side. By nasi, if let's say he was removed from being a nasi, kehejet maisi. Maybe par. So you're right. There's really no chiddush that obviously in that case, if the Kohen Gadol sinned while he was still Kohen Gadol, then certainly he's going to bring a par. But the chiddush is that if the nasi was removed from his position, and then the nasi, okay, it's not nasi, the past king sinned, so then in that case he has to bring like a hedjit. Okay, he doesn't bring a sawyer. So how do we know all this? So because we learn the following. Okay, the pasuk says v'hikriv al chatasai. So the entirety of that pasuk in Vayikra is imakayna Mashiach yechata. So we're talking about the Kohen Gadol if he sins. Well, Ashmas Ha'am, v'hikriv al chatasai asher chata par ben bakar. It says that he's required, the Kohen Gadol, he has to bring a par. That's what the pasuk says explicitly. Okay, so what do we learn out from here? Al chatasai. What do we learn out from that? Maybe chataso misha'avar. So it tells you that he has to bring the par since he sinned at the time while he was a Kohen Gadol. Now, shiach dinhu manasi shemevi bishkogas ma'isa. When it comes to a nasi that he brings bishkogas ma'isa, which means he doesn't require helam davar, doesn't have to paskin that way. He just does it wrong. Ein mevi chatasai misha'avar. So we say that he does not bring the carbon chatas from misha'avar, from when he sinned. So that's when it comes to the nasi. In other words, if the nasi was already removed from the position, this king, he is not a king, and then he sins, so he doesn't bring misha'avar like when he was a king. In other words, as we said in the Mishnah, while he's a king, if he sinned, he has to bring a sire. But if he was demoted from being a king, he does not bring a sire, he brings a seira, like a regular hedjit. So, and that's a nasi who does not require, the king does not require helam davar. So Mashiach shein mibim shkogas ma'isa el helam davar. It's required that he has to have like a psak, similar to like the beis din, im shkogas ma'isa. So in order for him to be chayav a par, we're more strict on this guy. So koshkein, then certainly we should say that there's sometimes he doesn't have to bring a par because it wasn't helam davar. So then certainly if he sinned when he was not the Kohen Gadol, he shouldn't have to bring a par. That even though he's not a Kohen Gadol now, doesn't make any difference. He still has to bring a par, no matter what. Even if he sinned while he was not a Kohen Gadol. So you can flip it around and say maybe the king Taka has to always bring like a king. Ma Mashiach, because you say by the Kohen Gadol, Shein maybe Bishkogas Ma'isa, maybe Chatas Mishavar. We always say that the Kohen Gadol is mechuyev to have to bring up the special carbon, regardless of the situation. So Nasish maybe Chatas Bishkogas Ma'isa, even without Helam Davar, Indodin Shemei Chatas Mishavar. So we should say that even though he was demoted, he should always have to bring a sawyer. Talmud Leimer Asher Nasi Echata, Kishu Nasi in, Kishu Hedit Lo. He only brings the sawyer when he is only when he's a nasi. In other words, when he sinned, Asher Nasi Yechata. He had to have been a nasi, a king, while he sinned. But if he was already demoted, then he doesn't bring. Okay. Let's see the next Mishnah. So it's, you gotta hold cup a little bit, but that's the point. Says the next Mishnah. Says Masisim Chatu. So let's say he sinned. Ad shelo nis namnu. He wasn't yet appointed as a king. So when it comes to a king, again, if he is a king and he sinned while he was a king, asher nasi yechata. So he has to bring the special carbon of a sa'ir like a king. But what happens if he was not yet appointed as a king? Maybe they're thinking about it, but he wasn't yet officially appointed. But he sinned as a hedget. Nismonu. And he was only appointed as a king, so the question is, which carbon does he actually bring? Now he's a king. So we say that it goes again after the time of the sin. At the time that he sinned, he was a hedget, so therefore he brings a se'ira. Rav Shimon Aimer im naidelahem. If it was notified of the sin, ad shel nisnamnu chayavin, then he's chayiv like of a hedget. However, umishnis namnu paturin. However, if at the time that he was appointed, this already took place, then he'll be pata. Let's go into Rashi. What exactly does Rav Shimon say? Rav Shimon chata v'yadiyah boy. He doesn't just require that he has to be a nasi at the time of the sin, but also he requires the yadiyah. What does that mean? V'huadim de Rav Shimon bereisha. He actually disagrees in the beginning that Tani Nasi Shechata, if he was a king when he sinned, then he was removed from his position, maybe Sa'ir. So in that case, the Mishnah we just saw in the previous Mishnah, in the beginning of this parak, said he brings a Sa'ir. To Rav Shimon Karmi Nami Deim Noidalo Misha'avar Deim maybe Sa'ir. However, Rav Shimon disagrees and says that if he knew about it only from the time that he was removed, then he does not bring a sa'ir. It's only if he sinned as a king and he realized that he sinned and has a chiyuv to bring a carbon. However, if there's no yediyah, then not, because as Rashi concludes, the chet of yediyah boy kishu nasi. So he's going to argue there in the Reish as well, and therefore it's basically that's just saying here too that if we want to say that again, if he is aware, so he sinned. And he was aware at the time he was a hedjit, so then he's chayav as a hedjit. However, if he didn't know about it until he was already a king, so it becomes problematic because he sinned as a hedjit, but he only found out about it as a king. So Ezu Nasi Zemelach Shnemer Mikol Mitzvos L'Shem Elokav She'ein Al Gabav El Hashem Elokav. So we had this pasuk before saying that a king has to be rich. But the point is that we keep saying the word nasi, 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 that's referring to a king. So says the Gemara, Min Hanimili. So how do we know all this? The Tanrabanan. The pasuk says again the same pasuk we quoted. Im Kohen Mashiach Yachata. If you have the Kohen Gadol who sins, Ashmas Ha'am. So prat lekadaimais. So it comes to exclude previous sins from before. In other words, if you were not yet a Kohen Gadol, you sinned before you were ever a Kohen Gadol, you were a Kohen, obviously, but you weren't a Kohen Gadol, so then, in that situation, you would bring like a hedjit, even though maybe you're a Kohen Gadol now. When it comes to a king who brings the sa'ir more often, he doesn't require helm davar, and maybe al hakdamois, hakaidmois. We know that he will not have to bring a carbon sa'ir in the event that he was sinned at the time that he was not yet a king. So Mashiach shein maybe el helm davar shkagus ma'isa and eventually yavi el hakodamais. So the question is, basically, you don't really need a pasuk to teach us this by Kohen Gadol because you can learn it out pashta from a king. So, it's not true. This is not a strong enough kavachaymer. We still need a pasuk because we know that a king is different. That he does not bring the carbon misha'avar when he was demoted, as we said. Let's say he sinned when he was demoted. Even when he was demoted and he sinned, nonetheless he still has to bring a par. So since we see that the Kohen Gadol is mechuyev to have to bring a par, even though he sinned after he was already removed from being a Kohen Gadol, So you would think also maybe he has to bring a par, even though he sinned when he was not a Kohen Gadol yet. So Talmud Leimer HaMashiach Yechata Chet Kishahu Mashiach Mevi. It's only when you are a Kohen Gadol. Kishu Hedget Enu Mevi. So this special carbon of the Par Mashiach is dafk in a situation when you sinned when you were a Kohen Gadol, or you were at least at some point a Kohen Gadol. But if you were never a Kohen Gadol, then this carbon cannot apply to you. You can learn the same thing when it comes to a Kohen Gadol. Rather, to a Nasi. You can also learn this out regarding a king. So it says, when is it that a king has to bring his special carbon of a sa'ir? Davka in a situation where he sinned when he was a king. But if, let's say, he was not yet a king, so then he would not bring. He would bring just like as a regular person. Again, we have a kavachaimer. So we know that a Kohen Gadol, we allow him to have a par, even though he sinned only after he was a Kohen Gadol, but then he doesn't have to bring it if he was not yet a Kohen Gadol, if he sinned when he was not yet a Kohen Gadol. So Nasi, we see by a king, he already is not required to bring the Sa'ir if he sinned after he was a king. So even though by a Kohen Mashiach would have to. So when it comes to a king, certainly, right, would not have to bring the special carbon of a Kohen of the Nasi. So the question again is, why do you need the pasuk? So Mal Mashiach, so because there's a problem. Shechein ein maybe mishkagas ma'isa. Timer benasi shemei mishkagas ma'isa. However, maybe mishkagas ma'isa. Since we find that actually when it comes to the Nasi, the king, he is more prone to have to bring the special carbon because he doesn't require shkagas ma'isa. So therefore, Yavi al Kadamos, you would think maybe he would also have to bring if he sinned before he became a king. Talmud lemer asher nasi yachata shechata v'harihu nasi v'lo shechata v'oidu hedget. So in that situation, he doesn't because he was a hedget at the time that he sinned. Tanubam. So again, quoting the pasuk asher nasi yachata, that when the king sins and he does one of these things wrong, okay. So Yochol Gezerah, you would think it's almost like a Gezerah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu saying that this king is destined to sin. Talmud Leimer, Im HaKoyin HaMashiach Yechata. When it comes to the Kohen Gadol, it says if. Malholan, it's likashiechata, it's only if he sins. So Avkan likashiechta, only if he sins. It's not a guarantee. So Amar Yochel Gezerah, you maybe would think it will happen that he'll sin. So Gezerah mehechetesa. So where in the Torah would we possibly say this? That's Rashi Klamer, Hechi Matzas Lamemer Yochel Gezerah. Dehecha Ashkan Gezerah Chiyagavna. Where do you find like a decree that God's like going to force a king to be a sinner? So Amri in Ashkan Dechsiv, because the pasuk says in Vayikra ki savoel Eretz Canaan, when you enter Israel, asher noisin lachem lachuz, which we give to you as an inheritance, v'nosati nega saras b'veis Eretz achuz aschem, and there's going to be saras in your homes. So what do we see from that? So it's telling you b'sayrahi. It's like a notification lahem shenigoyim boyin alehem de Rabbi Yehuda, that this is what's going to happen. You're going to end up having saras on your house. It's like not an option. It's something which is like a guarantee that it will happen. So that's what it's coming to tell you what will happen, even though it's obviously a bad thing. So maybe also we'll say over here that it's possible that it's like a guarantee that this bad thing is going to happen. Asher nasi yachata, that the king is going to sin. Rabbi Shimon Omer prat l'noigi oinsin. Actually, it's coming to exclude negoyim, which happen little by oinsin. Says Rashi, she'im bo negoyim alidei neficha shade delo mitamu. That if it comes from a shade, a shindal, a demon, if you will, that it's not going to have the potency of the dinim of Tumah. Lava Rabbi Yehuda, so again, that's the purpose of why it says it that way. So Rav Shimon, negoy oinsin milo matamo. According to the sheet of Rav Shimon, is it true that these negoyim that happen through alidei shade, that it won't happen, it won't become tamei. V'atanya adam kiyeh. Pasuk says in Vayikra, adam kiyeh b'or b'sor seiso sapachas or beheres. So it says that a person has on their skin these different discoloration, in which is considered to be a negas haras. They have to go to Aaron Kohen or to one of the children of Kohanim. So what do we learn out from here? Minadibur ve'elach. So what does that mean? It says Rashi, the negoyim bein adam bein babatim. It's coming to tell you whether we're talking about on your home or your person. Potter behen lifnei hadibor. Then it's potter lifnei hadibor. Da'is negoyim shiuru lifnei hadibor ein matamin la'achar dibor. So if, let's say, before the Torah happened, you happened to have saras, so that saras doesn't mean anything, because it was only at the time that you had the mitzvah of saras and adhering to all the laws. But before that, nothing. Avalu dinu. Tami b'zav v'tami b'negoyim. Ma'zav b'nadibor v'elech, af negoyim b'nadibor v'elech. You can say the same thing. You don't need a pasuk, because we know when it comes to a zav, it says kiyeh zav mibsarai, and we say that it's only after the dinim of zav take place, only once we have matan Torah, but not before. So why, again, you don't need a pasuk to teach us when it comes to getting saras, that anything that happened before. So imam or bezav, you can't compare it to a zav. Shachein ein matama b'oinus. When it comes to a zav, as we said, that there's different ways where baidik a zav, says Rashi, could go in aidei nafila, v'hakav, v'kviya, aidei shade. So in the event that, so when it comes to a zav, rather, if he becomes zav in 7 different ways, shiva drachim baikinas a zav, so then he's not going to be matama ba'oinus. Taimer b'negoyim shematama ba'oinus. However, when it comes to, if you get saras in all these different ways, a bruise or something like that, you still get saras. So says Rashi, so too when it comes to your house. So Talmud Leimer, ba'oinus. Again, ba'oinus is like something which is beyond your control, which we're saying that's alidei neficha shade. So Talmud Leimer, adam kiyeh min hadibur ve'elech. Okay, so that is a question. So Rabbi Leimer prat l'negi ruchais. So he says it's actually coming to exclude, and Rav is basically saying it's not a question. It's not referring to shadim. It's going nigoi ruchais. The alidei neficha shade, lo alidei adam. It didn't happen from you. It happened to a shade. V'chikatani timer menegoyim shematama ba'oinus ken alidei hakab kviya. So he makes a distinction between them. Rapabo Eimer prat l'negi kshafim when it comes to witchcraft. Okay, again. So v'chikatani timer menegoyim shematama ba'oinus. That's referring to kshafim, witchcraft. Tanurban. Asher. Okay, let's slow down. Let's look at question 5. Question 5. Ochal chaylev ad shlonisnimnu, which means you're chayev a carbon chatos ad shlonisnimnu, before you were a king. V'nisnu l'nasti, and then you became a king. Ha'im chayev carbon u'ma maybe. So, according to the Rabban, you're chayev to bring a kiss for a se'ira, just like a hedget. However, according to Rav Shimon, as we saw in the Mishnah, it depends. If you had yediyah only after you were already appointed as a king, so then you're going to be pater, because you have to have yediyah and the chet at the same time. So you'd only be chayev if you knew that you sinned, and you knew that you sinned before you were appointed as a king. Okay, we had that a while back. Tanurban. Asher nasi yachata prat l'chayla. So that's coming to exclude someone who is sick. Mishum dahavi lechayla idchi le menasiruse. Understand, he was a little bit sick, so he can't be a king anymore. So he has a fever. So Abdimi barchama prat l'nasi shenitztera. It doesn't mean sick. It means he mamash has saras. So once a king has saras, then he's removed from his nasias. Shenemar v'yanaga Hashem es hamelech. So this is in Malachim Beis. It says that Hashem afflicted the king with saras, Ad Yom Moisai, until the day of his death. V'yeshiv b'veis hachavshis v'yosim ben hamelech al habayis shofet es am haaretz. So it says that he sat b'veis hachavshis, the house of freedom. V'yosim ben hamelech, and Yosam was al habayis, was by the house. Now, b'dikamer bebeis hachavshis, since it says in the pasuk the house of freedom, mechlal di ad hashda avad havi. It sounds like the leader is an eved havi. It almost sounds like he was a slave, right? He's free. What do you mean? He's free. It sounds like then before he was a slave. So that's apparently what it says. So in Rashi, it just means once he became a saras, he's free from being a king. Now he's kehejetami, ve'enu maybe sire. Then he won't bring a sire. Udolok Rabbi Yossi Dirmul El Beparak Harira Kohen Mashiach Mishabali Dianius, someone who can become poor. Behind Mitzvah Lo Bali Dianius. The Gaza Dide Miha Isa, because what we learned also come to tell you is that he can never become poor. Anyway, so Kihad Rabbi Gamliel Rabbi Yeshua Havi Azib Safinta, and they were on a boat. We always find Rabbi Gamliel on a boat. Bahadi Rabbi Gamliel Havi Pita Bahadi Rabbi Yeshua Havi Pita Basulta. So Rabbi Gamliel had this bread, and Rabbi Yeshua had pita v'sulta, which is like flour. And Rashi says, Soiles, v'achinaka b'hadi pita, soiles kamcha, levi shapas misapesh. Because bread can become moldy, v'enim kasailas. It's not going to last as well as fine flour. Shlim pite de Rabbi Gamliel, samech asulte de Rabbi Yeshua. So basically he shared it. So mi havi yodata havilan akuva kulihai. Did we know that we're going to be like held up here so long? Diasis sulta, that you would bring flour. In other words, flour lasts longer than bread. So he was wondering, like, how did you know we're going to be here so long that you would have actually have thought to have brought flour? So Amalei shana. There's a star that appears once in 70 years. Oila umisra es asfanim. And it misleads all the sailors. The Amarti, I said, Shema Yala V'Yisa. I'm concerned that these sailors may get confused. The Yisa Osanu, and they'll end up causing us to go in a different direction. So Armalei, so he said, you know what? Because of that, it's much better for me to bring flour, because this way I'm not going to starve with moldy bread. So Armalei Kol Kach B'Yadcha. You had so much wisdom in your hands. Yata Oil B'Sfina. And you're busy on a boat doing business. Amalei Achat the Tama lie until you're worried about me. Tama al Shtei Talmidim Sheishacha Biabasha. There's two great people who are on dry land. Rabbi Lezer Chisma, Rabbi Yochanan and Gudgada. Shiyodim Lashar Kamatipa Yisesh B'Yam. They can even figure out how many drops are in the ocean. They ain't lehem pas lechel, but they have no food. They have no clothes to wear, which is very similar to the Gemara in Tefilas HaShachar in the fourth parak in Brachos, how Rabbi Gamliel was the Nasi, Rabbi Yeshua was very poor, he was a blacksmith, and Rabbi Gamliel didn't understand, what are you busy doing business for? So this is what you had to do just to survive. Even these great, brilliant people, they were poor. So Nasan Daito Loishivim Boraish. So he was thinking that maybe it makes sense that I should point him to be the head. Says Rashi, Rabbi Gamliel Daito Lehim Loishivim Barosh, Kadeshi Misparnasim Oisa Shror Shitan Lehem. So this way people will take care of him and they'll be able to eat better, won't be poor. When they went up, Shalchahem V'loi Ba. He sent out for these guys, but they didn't come. Then they came. It appears that leadership I am giving to you, says Rashi. It seems like you're running away from greatness, right? which apparently they were not interested in this position because the leadership is almost somewhat, as we're saying, is like a slave to the people of some sorts. As we continue Yodam and Beis, no, Avdos ani nois lechem. I'm giving you slavery, right? Shenem Rabbi Adabri Love Lamor Im Hayom Tiyeh Eved La'am Hazeh. So this pasuk in Malachim Aleph, that he's saying that today I'm basically making you into a servant. So that's basically what he was saying. It says Rashi, Avdosu loyal adam lafi shamutalav oil rabim, because now you have upon yourself the responsibilities of the multitudes, and therefore it appears that it's something which is a simple feat, something which is easy, and something which is great to be a leader. But the truth is, it may not necessarily be so simple. TB 9. So this is not so poshut. So what type of nigoy oinsin are matama? So this is TB 9. Very difficult question, actually, and I think I even got it right, which is unbelievable. So let me just put this over here. So let's just find the Gemara. So prat l'nigoy oinsin. So it could be with a shade, but then we said maybe not. It could be prat l'nigoy ruchais or prat l'nigoy kshafim. Let's see what I wrote. Zav ein matama b'oinis. That's not what we're looking for at all. Elu nigoy oinsin mataman. Zav ein matama b'oinis. B'zayin drachim b'oinis zav. No. Totally wrong. I totally got the answer wrong. So we're looking at ruchais kshafim, right? We're looking at this Rashi over here. As we saw, it says the chikatani tarma menagoyim metame ba'oinis is alidei haka v'kfia, right? Haka v'hakvia. That's in Rashi, okay? And also, that is metamin. And also, when it's this Rashi also over here by kshafim, so it says prat l'nigoy oinsim adik kshafim deloy matamu, okay? Kshafim is lo matamu v'chikatani taimar b'nigoyim de matamu b'oinis goyin shlo alidei kshafim. So kshafim is lo metama, right? Lo metama. So kshafim, very hard question. Like it's like you wouldn't think to even ask that this would be a question. So kshafim, witchcraft is not metamin. If it's not kshafim, is metama, okay, and then again hakava kfia is let's see this again. Hadi kaim Rav Shimon pral negoy einsim kegoy negoy ruchais de alidei nefichas shade v'lo alidei adam v'chikatan atamagam shematamin b'oinis. So alidei hakava kfia is metama, right? The v'loi shadim, right? Or ruchais. I'll put in. Okay. Unbelievable question. Maybe question 10. Talking about mi am haaretz prat l'nasi be'ez oifen this might nasi mikarbim. Okay. We may have done that as well. Maybe that's. Right. Let's see if we chance upon that question again. Let's see. No, there's no. This is amazing. There's no question. Okay. Let's just keep going. Unbelievable. All right. All right. So we're on Yudamid base. Okay. So we got some of this down. Tanaban. A little bit of a gadata now. Asher nasi yachata So Omer Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai, Ashrei Hador Shanasi Shlo Mevi Carbon. Asher doesn't mean you're guaranteed to sin. It means praiseworthy. Al Shkagosai, that even on a shogeg, he's bringing a carbon. Right? You're bringing, as a king, you have to bring a sire. So Im Nasi Shlo Mevi Carbon, Sarachata Weimer. So Mahu Hedget, right? So if we mention that a king brings a carbon, so then a hedget certainly should bring, right? So it's a great thing. The imashka goso maybe carbon sarachata weimer mahu zadainai. So if you see that he even admits to a mistake, so when it comes to him doing something on purpose, he's certainly going to bring a carbon. So maskav rabba bereda rabba el miata. The pasuk says dechsiv. The pasuk says in Vayikra Veis asher chata min a kaidish. Someone who sins from Kodesh, Yishalim, you have to pay its value, Ves Chamisha, so Yosef love, then you have to add an extra fifth. But Nois L'Kayin, you give to the Kayin, V'Kayin Yechaper love, and he's Mechaper by bringing a ram as an Asham B'Nislachloi. So that's the Pasuk. Now, Uvi Yeravam ben Nevat, regarding Ravam Nevat, that it says, Vayitin es Israel begalal chata yisravam asher chata ve'asher hechati es Israel. We know that he was machdes rabim, that Yerubim and Nevat, he caused people to sin because he didn't want people to be oil regel. He had this whole quarrel with Rechavam, who was from Malchus Beis David, and Yerubim wouldn't be able to sit in that area in the Beis Hamikdash, so therefore he didn't want people to be oil regel, to demonstrate that he maybe is not royal Malchus. So he put Avodah Zarah, and people were worshiping Avodah Zarah instead. So he was a machatis harabim, was Yerubim and Nevat. It says Asher Chata, Asher Hichati. So Chanami the Ashri Hadorhu. So understand that pasuk. First of all, you have the pasuk of a person who violates Kodesh, and it says the word Asher there, right? And it also says by Yerubim and Nevat, it says as Asher Chata, right? So it's obviously not Asher Chata. He sinned. So Asher means Asher. Oh wow, great to have Yerubim and Nevat. No, Shani Hacha, the Shani Krab Dibure. It's different. Why? Because all the other psukim, it says Im Kol Das Yisrael Yishku, Im Akum Mashiach, Im Nefesh, and then all of a sudden it throws in the word Ashrei, Asher Nasi Echata. The fact that it changes it in that context demonstrates there's something unique about the Nasi, and we say Ashrei. But over here, any other time it just stomps the word Asher, doesn't mean we make the same drush of Ashrei. Darish of Nachman Bar Rav Chisda Ma'idich Siv. What does the following pasuk mean? That which it says in Koheles, that Yesh Hevel, there's vanity, Asher Nasel Aretz, on this land, Asher Yesh Sadikim. Now Asher, there are tzadikim, Asher Magia Lehem Kamasi Harishayim, that it's reached upon them like the actions of the wicked. The Yesh Rishayim, now here it changes from the word Asher to Yesh. There are wicked. Shemagia leim kamasi tzadikim. So it's interesting, this change. So Ashreihem lo tzadikim. Shemagia leim kamasi rishayim shel oyom haba be'oyom haza. That when it comes to the tzadikim, they are given a great olam haba, which is comparable or even better than the way that the Rishoyim received their reward in this world. Oil lehem l'Rishoyim, but woe is it to the wicked? Shemagia lehem kamasat tzadikim shalom haba b'olam haza. Basically, instead of getting any reward in the world to come, like the tzadikim, the Rishoyim only receive it in this world. So Amarava ought to what? Tzadiki i'achi tre'alami mitzanilhu. Is it the worst thing in the world for a tzaddik to be able to oichel b'shtei shulchanais, as we see in Gemara and Brachos as well? That like, so what? So why can't he have a shtickle menucha and olam haza as well? So Elam Rava, this is how you read it. Ashreim tzaddikim shemagia alehem kimasir rishayim shalom haza b'olam hazeh. Now the tzaddikim not only get olam haba, but they also get goodness in this world. That that the Rasha actually gets suffering in this world. So even though on the surface, the short term, it looks like the Rasha is enjoying their lives, but as we know, choose your hard. So you can seemingly just enjoy all of the immediate gratification and benefits of this world, but the reality is that even in this world, you're not going to appreciate. So he said, plan. So he basically said, as Rashi says, like, do you have a particular mesechta that you have a strong knowledge in? I'm like, in. So he said, yes, I have a pretty strong knowledge in Torah, and that's pretty well masuder in my mind. So then he asked another question. Iyatrihu porta, are you? Do you have a little bit of money? Are you somewhat wealthy? I'm really in. Yeah, I'm doing okay. The Zabin Katina de Ara, that I have this portion of land, right? So things are pretty good. So so you demonstrate this truth, that even though you have certainly you're destined to greatness in Olam Haba, but you also have an Olam Hazeh. What does the following pasuk in Hosea mean when it says Mi Chacham, who's the wise person? V'yavin Eile Navoin v'Yedaim, that he has this element of knowledge. Am I quoting the right pasuk? And then it says Ki Yisharim Darchei Hashem, because their ways of Hashem are yashar, straight, but tzaddikim yelchu bom, and the tzaddikim go the right way. However, Peshoyim yichashlu bom, the wicked, they stumble. So what does this mean? So mashal shnei bnei adam shitzolu pischeihem, that you have two people, they have the exact same carbon pesach. However, echad achal l'shum mitzvah, echad achal l'shum achil gasa. One eats it with the right reasons, one eats it for themselves without, not, let's say, not l'shem mitzvah. So zeh shach l'shum mitzvah tzaddikim yelchu bom. Nebuch, those people, they ate it incorrectly. Says Rashi, Shulshim mitzvah. No, nescham l'achol kanuach seuda. They just were enjoying themselves. They weren't doing it l'shem mitzvah. Similarly, Reish Lakish Russia. Currently, you're going to call this guy Russia, and he doliyabid mitzvah min amuvchar pesach mikachel milo kachel. At least he ate the carbon pesach, right? So, okay, maybe he didn't do it in the best way. El mashal shnei adam zeh ishtoi v'achaiso imoy bebayis. Zeh ishto v'achaiso imo bebayis. Both of them have in a dark room their permitted wife, and also their non-permitted sister. So Echan is damulo ishto, Echan is damulo achaisai. So Zeshin is damulo ishto, who chanced upon his wife Sadikim Yelchabam. Zeshin is damulo achaiso, Pshayim Yichashubam. So Midami, how can you compare this? None kamrinan chadaderach. We were saying like one path. V'hacha shnei derachim. And over now you're mentioning like two paths. You're talking about a wife or a sister. El mashal aloit v'shtei b'naisav. Lot and his two daughters, which we of course know what happened. Hein shenischav l'shem mitzvah. They thought the world was destroyed. They saw Sodom was destroyed. They thought the whole world was destroyed. And therefore, their intention of procreation was mamash l'shem mitzvah. Sadikim yelchabam. However, who Lot shenischav l'shem aveira b'shem yichshel bam. Lot knew what was going on, even though he was drunk. Didn't make any difference. So, but then 1 second, who nami l'shem mitzvah hu nischam? How do we know that? Why are we speaking so badly about Lot? Maybe he was also. So, Rabbi Yochanan kol pasuk gazel l'shem aveira nemar. The pasuk says v'yisa Lot, he lifted up his eyes. Atisa eishas adoinav es adeneha, and we also find eishas potifar, the same language. Es einav yarmish shimshin begaimer. So, and again, when it came to Shimshin. So it says v'yirmelu ava v'imo ha'ein b'v'nois achicha v'cholami isha kiyato haylech l'kachas isha miplishtim ha'arelim. What are you doing, Shimshon? You're taking this girl. There's plenty of other kosher girls. You're taking this Philistine girl. Yirmer Shimshon el aviv. So Shimshon said to his dad, Oisa kachli kihi yishar be'enai. This is the girl that I wanted. Okay, so obviously it was not necessarily the best of intentions. Oisa kachli kihi yishar be'enai. V'yar oisa Shechem ben Chamor. Right, so Shechem who gazed upon Dinah as koil kikar hayarden ki bi'ad isha zayna ad kikar lochem. And this pasuk in Mishlei, it ends off Eishes ish nefesh yikara tatsut. It talks about Eishes ish kikula mashke, like the whole area was like watered. Echel achrei me'ovai, I'll go after my lover. Naisni lichmi umiyomai samri upishti shamanai v'shikuoi. Who give me my bread, water, and wool, linen, oil, and beverage. So this pasuk, there's a lot of pasukim over here, begins in Hosea ki zonsa imam hovisha. So it mentions znus. Now, but understand. Now, v'ha menasanis. Why are we again speaking about Lot in this way? He was an Ionis. He was drunk. He didn't know. So Tanim Yishem Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Chayni Lama Nukad al Vav she Bekaima shel Bechira. How come when we have the pasuk, it says V'tashkena esavi hen yayin b'layla, that Lot was given wine at night. V'toba habakira, and the Bechira, the young one, the first one came, the Tishka v'savia, and slept with her father. V'yada b'shichba b'koima. He didn't know her lying downs or getting up. So why does it say dots on that word? Shibish shchava lo yada. When he was lying down, he didn't know. Avo b'koima yada. But when he got up, he did know. So what's the problem? Well, it was the past. So nafgamina dilapani achrina lui boile lemishti. Why was he drinking wine the next night? He obviously figured out the reason why he drank wine the first night was so he should get drunk, and then his daughter would do as she did. So then once he figured that out, that was the reality, then he shouldn't have done the second night. And therefore that demonstrated that it was completely shol Shem Shemayim. Darish Rabba Maidechsiv. What is the following pasuk? Again, lots of psukim here. In Mishlei, someone says, Och nifsha mikirias ois, that this brother who sins from the city of idols, umidyoinim kivriach armoin. So just like a bariach, just like a bolt. So es nifsha mikirias ois eloit shepirish ma'avraham. This is referring, the sin was Lot, who separated himself from Avraham, and he ran after money. And then when it says Moedim Kavriach, that it was disputed like a bolt, Armoin, Shehilid Midyanim Ben Yisrael Amoin. Shehitel Medinin, there was disputes Ben Yisrael with Amoin, between Yisrael and Amoin. Let's see, Rashi. Okay. Fine. Shenemar, because the pasuk says, Lo yavo amoni moabi b'kal Hashem. Okay. Dorish Rabbi Vitem Rabbi Yitzchak Maidech Siv. What does this following pasuk mean? That says, Wasava Yavakesh. So for lust you are seeking out Nifrod, one who is separated. B'chol Toishia Yisgala. Anyone with like salvation or wisdom will be uncovered. It'll be uncovered. So L'savan Yavakesh Nifrod Zeloit Hifrod Avraham. He's separated from Avraham. B'chol Toishia Yisgala. Wisdom will be uncovered. Shinis Gale Kaloino Babati Kinesius Babat Midrashais. He was disgraced of shame in the base medrash and the base achneses. Fine. Lashon Gilui, Rashi says. So the Tanan, we learned Amoini Moavi Asurin Isser Oilam. So again, that this is obviously the product of Lot's relationship with his daughters, is Ammon and Moab. And they're aser oila. V'yomer ula Tamar zansa. Tamar was mazana, says Rashi. However, v'nischavna l'shum mitzvah. Her intention was a shem mitzvah, says Rashi, Kadei shehemid zerem and tzadikim, so that she would be able to have children from a tzaddik, from Yehuda. K'dichsev ki ra'asa ki gadol shalah. So Tamar was mazana, the Zimri zina, and of course we know Zimri, who was l'shem avera, also had znus in the time of Parshas Pinchas and Balak. So Tamar zansa yatzim imenu malachim and avim, because of her intention was right. Zimri zina nafa kam ribbon Yisrael, many died because of that. Amar Rav Nachman Yitzchak Gedolah Aveira L'Shma and Mitzvah Shlo L'Shma. Very interesting language. Better to do an Aveira L'Shma than a Mitzvah Shlo L'Shma. Shenemar, because the pasuk says in Shoftim, Tivayrach Minashim Yael, that Yael, who had relations with Sisera, but her intention was to weaken him, to kill him, and she was successful in killing him pretty dramatically with a tent peg. Eishes Chaver Hakini, even though she was married, Minashim Ba'oil Tivayrach. She's even more blessed than these other women. So Maninhu Nashim Ba'oil, so Rivka Rechav Aleya, that she's even more blessed than these great women. Aini, it's not so. So what do we see? Her Aver was Lishma. So her Aver Lishma was even greater than all these great women who did mitzvahs. Maybe they did mitzvahs Shlo Lishma. How do we see Shlo Lishma? The Yomi, that's a shtickle hard to understand. Where do we find that they were Shlo Lishma? Okay. The Yomi Rabbi Yehuda Marav Oyim Yasakad B'Tar B'Mitzvahs Shlo Lishma Shematak Shlo Lishma B'Lishma. So aim a kimitzvah Shlo Lishma, it's always equal. Oyim Rabbi Yochanan Sheva Be'ilois Bal Oisa Rasha. So Sisera, when he had relations with the oil, it was actually a total of 7 times. Be'oisa Shosh. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, Bein Ragleha Kara Nafal Shacha Bein Ragleha Kara Nafal Kasher Kara Sham Nafal Shadud. So this language is repeated, and it mentions that between the legs he kneeled and fell down. So v'haka mishani mi'avera. So anyway, the question is, how was Yael allowed to do this? L'chayra, and Rashi counts how we got to the 7. How is she able to do this? Right? She got hana from an avera. So Rabbi Yochanan Shem Yochai, Afil Toivasan Shel Rishayim. Even the pleasure from a wicked, Rahi Eitzel Tzadikim. So she didn't get any hana. She was not enjoying being with this disgusting person in her eyes. Sisera was a Russia. So even though you could say, well, the Maisa Tashmish will be something enjoyable in general, but not when you're dealing with a Russia. And therefore, Tzaddikus is not going to get any hana from it. It was totally L'Shem Shemayim. Gemara could have said Karka Oilam, as we see by Esther. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda, Rav, Yasakad B'Tar Mitzvah Safil Shol Shma, Shebetar Shol Shma Bol Shma, Shebeschar Mem Beis Karbanais. This is a Gemara in numerous places. There's 42 Karbanais. Shehikru Balak Harasha, Zach V'Yatzim Mena Rus. So Rus came from Balak. Diam Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina Rus Bas Benoi Shel Egloin Ben Benoi Shel Balak Melech Moav. So we see, of course, the whole notion of Boaz marrying Ruth. His drush was Moaviv or Moavis, that he would be allowed to marry a Moabite woman. That was a whole drasha. So anyway, she actually descended from these great people, who again were maybe not the biggest of tzaddikim, like Balak and Egloin. Okay. Fine. Amar Rav Chia bar Rabba Rav Yochanan Manan Shel Kodesh Baruch Hu Mechafeach Afilu Schar Sicha Na. How do we know that Hashem will not even hold back, even when it comes to a Sicha Na, just simple words? Shehik Mahacha Diilu Bechira Dekari Moav. Over here, what did she call her son? Moav, which is definitely not a clean language to say this child is from my father. Let the whole world know that this child is from my father. But again, the point is, it's mamash l'shma, right? So Hashem said, Al teitzer es moyav, val tisker ba milchama. When it comes to moyav, don't steer up with them, don't do battle with them. So it's only milchama, as we continue down from the olive, hu deloi. You shouldn't fight with them. Ha tzirei tsarinhu. But afflicting them is nishkaferlach if you have to do that. Biutzare, the younger daughter, Dekari ben Ami, the son of my nation, which is Amoin. Amrulei al titsuram, don't cause any pain. Val tiskerbam klal, afil tsuri loy, don't cause any anguish at all. So we see even the sensitivity of a word is significant. You should go quick to do a mitzvah. Since this first daughter went one day first, she was Zoicha 4 generations of Malchus. And Rashi says Oived, because this is who came from Moav, Rus, and who is Rus's son? Oved. Uved's son, Yishai, then David, then Shlomo. V'iltziro lo havim Yisrael ad Rechavam. However, Amon's descendant only was Rechavam later on, who was the son of Shlomo Melech. In that situation, because he came from Ammon, again, that was the whole problem. It was Yeravam and Rechavam, right? So Rechavam was, again, when the Malchus was split after Shlomo HaMelech, and again, one day could make a big difference. Question 6. Madua hiko hakasav al b'nei Amoin ve'aser otzarim v'sargambam. So again, just by the language, schar sichana, speaking nicely, like the younger daughter did by calling her son Ben Ami as opposed to calling him Moav. For that reason alone, it was granted that reward. Let's see, maybe another question. Question. Interestingly enough, TA had no questions on this. It was filled with great questions you could have asked. Nothing for TA. In TB, we saw so again, that's maybe something which we will see. We kind of saw it a little bit. We'll go over it next time. Adkan.